talk about the convention security. What we have done is that we have discussed and worked out certain recommendations, and I will flash these policy recommendations, or can be discussing, or the panelists will talk about them first. Sorry. Over to you, sir.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. First of all, let me congratulate Sanober Institute for its first formal event, though it has already been launched. Those of you who have been following the news. Admiral Hashmat has very elaborately explained to you what is a national security, and as I've been assigned to speak on the traditional or conventional aspect of national security, before I do that, I just want to establish, for those of you who are not intimately studying the foreign policy and the national security, that what is the relationship. There is a nexus between the foreign policy and the national security, because these are intrinsically intertwined with each other, and they are interdependent on each other. And the foreign policy is actually which enables you to prevent the conflict that endangers your national security. Even when the nations they get entangled into the armed conflict, the role of the diplomacy becomes more important, because in order to de-escalate a conflict, it is the diplomacy which will have to work while the conflict is going on, while the war is going on. And even to end the war, actually there will be no other means. You can go on fighting and fighting and fighting unless you have the diplomatic skill and you have the diplomatic means, which we have a lot of experts here. The termination of a conflict or a resolution of a conflict will always come through diplomacy. So one has to understand the primacy of a foreign policy and primacy of a diplomacy in terms of the conflict management, conflict settlement, and conflict resolution. Having said that, as Admiral Hasham has already explained, the traditional national security has been defined in a relatively narrow context, what we have been studying in the last 30-40 years, and they primarily restricted two things. One was the territorial and geographic borders, or the territorial integrity of a state, and the other one was maintaining internal peace and stability, which we normally call internal security. However, the contemporary concept, as already said, of a national security, it encompasses the comprehensive security, which of course has different other dimensions: the human security, the economic security, the political security, and food security, and even the environmental security in today's context. The national security that basically is done through the traditional national security and non-traditional national security. I will just focus on a national security. I just have, I think, 5 more minutes to do that. The traditional national security threat, because what is the security? As Admiral Hasham has said, it is the absence of a threat, that you are not damaged, your national interest is not damaged, and you protect your national interest, and when it is threatened, you are capable enough to safeguard your national interest. So defining it to the territorial integrity, the perpetual conflict and a perpetual friction, which can be called enmity as well, that is caused by the hostile India. That is our main constant threat in the context in which we talk of a national security. Then the main conflict is, of course, non-resolution of the Kashmir dispute. Then there is unstable and unpredictable relations with Afghanistan. Unfortunately, our relations, as highlighted by Ambassador Azaz, our relationship with Iran are also getting adversely affected. The internal political and socio-economic friction, which leads to recurrent insurgency-like situation. I shall not be talking about that because General Sabrez will be speaking
on that. Then there are a host of other factors. It's beyond the scope of today's seminar, which is the perpetual political instability, endemic economic meltdown due to rampant corruption, inconsistent policies, injustice, inequality, deprivation, absence of representation and consultative government, lack of focus on the human resource. These all endanger your national security. Coming to basically how do you respond? You have two main things. I don't want to get into certain technical things because we have a learned audience, but for the young audience, the students, you have a military structure and you have a military strategy. It's a combination of a military structure and a military strategy, interplay of a military structure and military strategy through which you implement your national strategy. In military structure, we have traditional forces, which are generally defined as defensive forces, and offensive forces are defensive and counter-offensive forces. In the context of Pakistan, we do not have offensive forces because neither we have offensive designs, and unfortunately, we do not have the wherewithal, we do not have the resources as well. Even if we have the intention, we don't have the resources. And that's your traditional army, navy, air force. Then you have strategic forces. You must have heard the strategic forces. Strategic forces have two components. One is the non-nuclear forces. You can call them short-term, short-range, mid-range, long-range missile system. You must have heard of the Army Strategic Command and so on and so forth. Then you have strategic weapons. We have the experts. Dr. Adil will be talking to you about that, your nuclear capability. So you combine all these things. And in addition to that, you have National Guard. Certain countries have very strong National Guard. You will be surprised to know that the American armed forces are not for the national defense. They are for something else, for the projection of the national power and protection of the national interest. It is the National Guard, US National Guard, those who are responsible for the territorial integrity. We do have on papers National Guard. Unfortunately, they are very weak, they are very ill-organized, and they are very ill-equipped, ill-structured. Then you have paramilitary forces. You must have heard the Rangers, the Frontier Corps. Over a period of time, the number of the Rangers and Frontier Corps, it has multiplied many times. If at least it is twice the actual, then we have CPEC security forces, Pakistan Army, Navy, Air Force, reservists, and military strategy. Commonly, you must have heard about the defensive offensive strategy. Last two words. I have 2 more minutes, sir. What we need to do, you see the recommendations. We run complete 1-year course to teach the people in the National Defense University how to articulate your national security, but we're trying to condense it in few minutes. First of all, my recommendation is in line what you would have seen already in Serial Bravo. Of course, the first one is a more of a policy issue that the Office of the National Security Advisor should be made more effective. It must work not as a part-time business, but as a continuous process, and it has to interact with various other national organs. But there is a need to have an appropriate blend of the strategic forces, the conventional forces, and non-conventional forces. I'm not getting into the details, what would we mean by the non-conventional. Why do we require the blend? It is basically to prepare a response that will cause an unacceptable damage to the enemy. That is what is called deterrence. Because if the damage is acceptable, there will be no deterrence. Second, we need to develop more effective. We have a large number of armed forces. I have served for 35 years, so has General Sabres as well. And we have the right men who have commanded the Pakistan fleet. We know we have large number of forces. It is not per se what is the number you have. It is the capability what is more important. So what you need to do is that you need to have an effective, lethal, and by when we say lethal, it means precision and destruction-oriented forces, mobile and agile conventional forces. Then, under the prevailing financial constraints, you must have heard कि ये आर्मी का बजट इतना है, डिफेंस का बजट इतना है. आप सुनते होंगे डिफेंस का बजट कैप कर दिया गया है. Very few people understand what does it mean कैप कर दिया गया है. A particular amount has been seized or a percentage of the GDP has been seized or a percentage of your budget has been seized. हो क्या रहा है कि एक्चुअली जब आप उसको कैप करते हैं तो आपकी जिस तरह नॉर्मली हमारी इन्फ्लेशन इफेक्ट होती है, आपकी रिसोर्सेज श्रिंक होते जाते हैं. उस श्रिंकिंग ऑफ द रिसोर्सेज की वजह से यू कैन नॉट अफोर्ड टू हैव सच लार्ज फोर्सेज. सो देयर इज द नीड टू हैव अ रिकन्फिगरेशन. आई विल यूज द वर्ड रीस्ट्रक्चरिंग. सो टेकिंग एडवांटेज ऑफ द स्ट्रेटेजिक डेटरेंस. वी हैव स्पेंट लॉट ऑफ रिसोर्सेज ऑन स्ट्रेटेजिक डेटरेंस. स्ट्रेटेजिक डेटरेंस का कोई डिविडेंड होना चाहिए कौम को. और वो डिविडेंड क्या है? वो डिविडेंड क्या है कि आप स्ट्रेटेजिक डेटरेंस को बहुत बड़ा आप ओवरप्ले नहीं करते, लेकिन उसका एडवांटेज लेते हुए आप अपनी स्टैंडिंग आर्मी जो है उसको रिस्ट्रक्चर करते हैं, और साथ साथ आप नेशनल गार्ड जो है वो इस तरीके से बनाते हैं कि योर कंप्लीट यूथ. रिसेंटली आई वाज इन चाइना in one of the university, and I was surprised to see that the young students, those who were the freshmen in the first year, they all were undergoing a military training. We have two ambassadors, former ambassadors from China. You can ask more from them. So the whole nation has to be prepared. All able-bodied, not only men, I include the women as well. Last but not the least, we need to improve the human resource. हम टेक्नोलॉजी की बात करते हैं, हाईटेक वेपन्स की बात करते हैं. भाई आप हाईटेक वेपन ले लेंगे, अगर हाईटेक वेपन को इस्तेमाल करने वाला जो उसके पीछे द मैन बिहाइंड द गन डज नॉट नो हाउ टू यूज द गन, हाउ इफेक्टिवली यूज द गन. तो जो आपकी ह्यूमन रिसोर्स है उसको इक्विप करने की ज़रूरत है कि वो इस हाईटेक टेक्नोलॉजी को एब्जॉर्ब कर सके, उसको सिमुलेट कर सके और उसको यूज़ कर सके. थैंक यू वेरी मच.